Congratulations on making it this far. You've covered a huge amount. You've looked at front-end technologies, including HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and jQuery, frameworks like Bootstrap, content management systems like WordPress, and server-side languages like PHP. This next chapter is really the last piece of the puzzle. MySQL databases are the memory of your website and allow you to save things about your users or other information that your users will need to get access to. It's very difficult to make decent interactive websites without some kind of a database, so you really do need to be aware of how they work and how you can make the most of them. I'm hoping as well that if you are following along on my How to Make $10,000 While Learning to Code book, that you've also made a reasonable chunk of cash so far. You're definitely in a position to be earning money from your web development skills right now. If you've had some success, or even if you're struggling, let us know in the forums. I'd love to help you out and hear your successes. So, without further ado, let's dive into MySQL databases and see how they work. Bringing up Chrome, I've still got the weather predictor up from our PHP chapter. Can't help but trying another one out. Oh, there we go. Still working great. Okay, so I'm going to start off directly from the Eco Web Hosting homepage, and I'm going to log into my demo account that I created previously. Save that. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the whole process. The only thing we're going to jump to is the view hosting passwords and then clicking on the domain name, and that will take us straight to the control panel for the domain. If you're not using the free hosting that comes with the course, that's fine. You just need to find out how to create MySQL databases from your hosting provider. So if we scroll down, we can see the MySQL databases icon is there. Because you're on the advanced package, you've got unlimited databases to play with. So let's click on there and create a database. So I would recommend using the generate password function. And I'm just going to call mine example DB. Create. There we go. So the database is created instantly. It's given a prefix so it doesn't get confused with any other databases on the servers, and there's your password to access it. So I'm going to click Manage to have a look at what this database actually is and how it behaves. Now here we have a program called PHP MyAdmin. So it's an admin program written in PHP that allows you to look at your database and edit it and play around with it a little bit. So it's a great way for us to get familiar with how databases are structured. So if I click on the database name here, there are no tables in the database at the moment. So a database is actually just a collection of tables, each of which can be considered pretty much an Excel spreadsheet with a lot of columns and a lot of rows with various bits of data in them. So let's create a table. I'll create a users table and we'll give it 5 columns for the moment. I don't know quite how many I'm going to need. So what information do I want to keep about my users? I'll have their name, and their name is going to be a text field. We'll have their email address, also a text field. We'll have their password, also a text field. And one final bit of information that I want about them is their ID. Now, this is not actually something that my users are going to enter, but it's something that it's a very good idea to have in any database table. So your ID can be an integer or possibly a big integer if you're going to have a very large number of users. And then scroll over here when you create your ID and set it to be the primary index and set it to AI. That stands for auto increment. So that means that each user in your table is going to be given a unique ID. So it's something to refer to them uniquely as. That's a very useful thing to have, and it also makes searching your database a little bit faster. So I definitely recommend putting an ID column into every database table that you create. I don't think I need a fifth column actually, so I'm just going to save that there. Great, so now I've created my users table. If I click on there, I don't have any users yet, so let's create one. So I use the insert button to create a user. So his name can be Rob, email can be rob@robpercival.co.uk, password can be test for the moment, and I'll leave the ID blank and it will get automatically generated. Okay, let's have a look. If I go back to browse, I can now see, hopefully this is making slightly clear how a database stores its data. We've entered a new user with a name of Rob, email of rob@robpercival.co.uk, and the password and an ID there as well. Let's just have a quick click around and see what other things we can do within PHPMyAdmin. We can click on structure, and that will tell you just the fields that you have in the database and allow you to change their type or do other things with them. You can add extra columns wherever you like. You can search within the database, so if I was to search for a name of Rob, I'll find myself there. We've looked at insert. You can do things like export your database so that you can change it to another provider or to a different database, import from another database, and do things like delete the whole database or copy tables or do anything like that. So that's great for getting your database set up and putting some data in, but how do we actually access the data from our websites? That's what we'll look at in the next video. So in the last video, we saw how to create a database and add some data to it using PHPMyAdmin. Now we want to see how to actually connect to a database using our scripts on our website. So I'm going to bring up FireFTP again, connect to my test domain. I've got my 3 folders there and an index file. I'm going to create a new folder or a new directory, call it MySQL. And then all my MySQL PHP files I'll put in there. And then we'll create a new file called index.php. And we'll edit that file. In our text editor. Okay. So how do we connect to a database with PHP? So let's start by creating some PHP code. Now to connect to our database, we use a command called mysqli_connect. Now you may have seen mysql_connect before. That one is very much in use still, but it's discouraged now. The MySQL is the improved version of the MySQL interface, and all new development is being encouraged to use MySQL. So I definitely recommend using that for all new websites that you create. And then we provide the database server. Now this script is running on the anytestdomainwillwork.com, which is the same domain that the database is set up on. So that means we can use localhost as the database name. The other option is to use the IP address, which is that one there. And that will work, but IP addresses do in some cases change. So if you use localhost, then even if the IP address of the database updates, then localhost will still work. So use localhost when you possibly can. And then we enter our username, which is the same as the database name in this case. So cl20-exampledb. And then we enter our password. And finally, we enter the database name that we want to use, which is the same as the username in this case. Again, if you're using a different web hosting provider, you'll need to get the details for the database from them. Okay, so that's it. We're now connected. How can we actually check whether or not this database connection is working? Well, PHP will actually throw an error if the database connection doesn't work. So if we enter echo working, then that will display if the connection works. So there's a function MySQL I connect error, which will return an error message if we can't connect. So let's have a look at that. MySQL I connect error. If I then refresh that. Okay, so the error is there's an unknown MySQL server at LAL host. So I can fix that pretty easily by correcting the localhost. I can do similar things if I choose an incorrect login, then we'll get access denied, etc., etc. Now, it's not generally a good idea to display the MySQLi error right on your page, because once again, people could use that to find out your database names and try and attack your website. So what we normally do is use an if statement. So if there is an error, then just echo could not connect to database. So that tells you and your users that there's a problem without actually showing them all the details of your server. Okay, so let's just maybe change the password there. There we go. So you just get a flat error which doesn't give away anything. It just tells the user and yourself what's wrong. Bring that back in. Okay, so we've connected to our database. It would be good though if we could actually just return some data from our database. So in the next video, we'll find out how to do just that. Now, just before we look into retrieving data from a database, we should have a quick look at what you do if the database connection doesn't work. So we've already looked at the possibility of displaying an error message. So could not connect to database. But really, if you can't connect to the database, your whole web page is probably not going to work. So a nice way of dealing with that is simply use the command die. So die will stop your script running immediately and will give the error message that you put in the quotes there. So let's see that in action. So there it is, and if I echo hello afterwards, we won't see that. Nothing happens. So once you issue the die command, the script doesn't continue at all. So that's generally a good idea if your script relies on the database to actually work at all. Okay, so once we've connected, how do we actually download information from our database? Well, it's reasonably straightforward. We start with something called a query. So a query is a command that we send to a database to either extract some information, add some information, or edit some information. So we're going to create a variable called query, and a query that takes data out of a database is known as a select query. So we use the select command, and for the moment we're going to select everything. So star is the symbol for everything. So select everything from users. Notice the capitalization there. It's not crucial. The script will still work if you don't use capital letters, but it's convention to use capital letters for MySQL commands and keywords, and small letters for database names and other things that you might be using in there. So that's our query. Now to run the query, we use the command MySQL I query. Now this takes two parameters. The first one is the database connection itself. So we're going to go back to our MySQLi connection and set a variable equal to MySQLi connect, and then link will be what we use to refer to that database connection. So we start with link, and then we send our query as the second variable in this function. Now that doesn't actually return the data itself, but it returns true if the query was successful. So we can use if to see whether it was successful, and if it was, we can for the moment just display it worked. Excellent. Great. Let's see what it will look like if it had failed. So if, for example, I tried to select some data from a table which doesn't exist because I haven't created it yet, it failed. So this MySQLi query doesn't necessarily tell you whether there was any data returned, but it will tell you whether or not the general query was successful. So our next step is, if it worked, we need to actually do something with that data and display it somehow. So we do that with the MySQL fetch array command, and that will fetch an array from the query that has just taken place. So we need a way to refer to that query. What we normally do is use a variable called result and set that equal to the MySQLi query that's taken place, and then the MySQL fetch array command then will run on that result. And so that will return the array with the actual data in it. So we can set another variable called row equal to that. So our row variable will be an array containing the results from the first line of this query. So let's display that. And let's not forget our I, the end of MySQL. And there we go. So it's returned the various bits of information about Rob in that table. Fantastic. So we've connected to our database and we've saved some information from that database. In the next video, we're going to see how to add information to the database and edit information that's already there. So we've retrieved data from our database. Now let's find out how to add data to it. So to insert data into our database, we use a query as before, and we use the insert command. Now we want to insert into a particular table. We've only got one, so we'll insert into users. And now we put the names of the fields that we want to add data for. So I'm going to do just one for now. So the name field. Now with MySQL, if you want to specify your database name and your field names, we use what's called a backtick to do that. So on my keyboard, it's just to the left of the Z key. So use those rather than single quotes or indeed double quotes to separate out your database names, your table names, and your field names in MySQL. And then we specify the values that we want to give to those fields, or in my case just one. Now the values, we use normal quotes, so just normal single quotes to separate the value fields, and then end the query, semicolon. And then we just use the same command as with the select. So MySQL query, link query. This time I'm not going to bother with the if-else statement. I'll just assume that it works. A dangerous thing, but we'll hope for the best. So if I update that, we're still only getting a single result from there. We'll look at that in the next video. But if we go back into the phpMyAdmin and check out the database, we can see that the name has been added. Fantastic. So we've got Ian there. Let's add an email address and a password for the next one. So we'll insert name, email, password, and we'll have someone called Beth, who can be beth@gmail.com, and her password can be apples. Okay, let's just run that. Check that it's updated. There she is. Brilliant. I'm going to run that a couple more times so that Beth appears several times in our database. There we go. If we just check the IDs, you'll notice that all of the IDs are unique. I've got one missing because I deleted one somewhere along the line, but every ID that's created will be completely unique, so you can use that to specify a particular user without being afraid that two users might have the same name or the same email address even. Okay, so that's inserting data into a database. How about updating data that's already there? Let's comment out that insert command, because we don't want to keep inserting Beth into our table. And we'll have a new query, and this is an update query. So we want to update the table users, and let's say we want to give Ian an email address. So we can say set email. The backticks aren't actually required unless you use either names with spaces in or names which are reserved for MySQL commands, which I wouldn't recommend doing. You don't need to put backticks in, but it's generally a good principle to get into, to keep the backticks in, to keep everything tidy and working. But if you want to leave those out, it will still work. So we can set email to ian@hotmail.com. Oops, I definitely want to use a single quote there. And then end that command. Now, if I run that command as it is, that's going to update all of the users and set all of their email addresses to ian@hotmail.com. I definitely don't want that, so I want to specify only Ian to get updated. So I say where. Now I've got two ways that I can specify Ian. I can either specify his name or I could specify his ID. I suppose I could also specify the fact that his email is empty or the password is empty. Generally, I like going by IDs because you know that they're going to be unique. So let's get into the habit of doing that. So it's where ID, again, let's put some backticks in, is equal to 3. Now I like adding in limit 1. If I know that I only want to update one user in my database, then if you put limit 1 on, even if there are a number of fields that match the where command that we've got here, it will still only update 1. So if, for example, I typed that, which would be a disaster to type in a big database because you'd lose all your email addresses essentially, as long as you've got limit 1 on the end, then you're okay because you're only going to make, at worst, one mistake. So that should do it. And again, we use the MySQL query command to actually run the command. So now let's run that and have a look at our database. And there we go. The email has now updated to ian@hotmail.com. Let's do one more update. Let's say we want to change one of Beth's email addresses. So if we want to update, maybe Beth has got a Hotmail address as well. So beth@hotmail.com, where ID equals 5. And then we just run that. And there you go, you can see that it's updated there. If we chose to update, maybe Beth wanted her name to actually be down as Bethany for all her accounts with us. So then what we would do is type name equals Bethany, and we'd want to set that every time name was currently equal to Beth. Now in this case I need to take off my limits because I want it to happen more than once. So if I take off my limit, I make absolutely sure that my where statement is accurate, and this is only going to update Beth, not anyone else. So I'm pretty confident of that this time. Let's update the database, take a look. There we go. So we've updated everything inside the database. Great, so now we know how to insert users into our database. We know how to update information that's already there. And we've done some introductory taking of information from the database. Now that we've got more items, we can take further what is happening down here. In fact, if we look over here, what's actually going on is we're only getting one row from the database. We're still only getting Rob's row, even though there are a lot more. So how do we get those other items? We'll find out in the next video. Now that we've got more users in our table, let's see how we can select more than one of them at once. So, over here, if we go back a couple of videos, we've got our command to take some data from the database, selecting everything from users, and then we're displaying the row which was the result of the MySQL fetch array function. Now, that's great if you're only expecting one row, but if you want more than one, then we need to loop through all the results. So that's easy enough to do. We create a while loop, and we just then put our print our row instruction in that while loop. So that will now loop all through however many results we've got and display them all. So let's take a look. There they all are. So masses of code there. If you actually view the source of a page once you've printed everything, it looks a lot nicer. So if you want to spend a bit of time looking at data for whatever reason that you've print-r'd, then looking at the source is going to be much more fun than looking at the code itself. So you can see there's two ways to access the data. You can access it by the name of, or the key name of the field. So ID, password, email, name, or you can access it by the number of the field through the database. So the name is always going to be 0 because that was the first field that was created, and then 1 is the email, 2 is the password, and 3 is the ID. So that's two ways to access data depending on what you want to do with it. I normally find that using that is the most common way of doing it. Okay, let's just do a few other select commands to see how we can restrict this a bit. So maybe we don't want to select everyone. Maybe we just want to select all the users that are called Rob. So we use exactly the same syntax that we did with the update command. We use the where command. So select star from users where name equals Rob. Simple. So now we've just got the users with the name of Rob. There's only one of those. What else can we do? Let's see if we can find all of the users which have an H in their email address, just for example. The way we do that is we use the like command. So we say where name like Rob, but instead of Rob, we want to find that they've got an H in their name. And if we want the H to be anywhere in the name, did I say name or did I say email? I think I said email. So let's change it to where email is like H, and I've put percentage signs either side of the H there. That means we could have anything before the H and anything after. So essentially we're looking for users that have got an H in their email address anywhere. So if I save that and try again, let's look at the source instead. We get Ian because he's got an H there, and Beth has got an H as well, but we don't get Rob because there's no Rob in robpercival.co.uk. Okay, what about if we wanted users whose name began with a certain letter, not just had a B in them, but began with a B? We could do that with a B and a percentage. You might be wondering, is that going to work? Because we've got a capital B. In Bethany's name. Let's take a look. It does. So the like command by default is case insensitive. So even though Bethany's first name begins with a capital B, we're returning it anyway, even though we're looking for a small b. And similarly, we could look for those whose names end with a B, and that would be Rob. Okay, so we're starting to realize that we can do some reasonably advanced select commands here. What else can we do? We can look at greater than or less thans. So maybe for some reason I want to select all the users where ID is greater than 3. So that should select Beth 3 times. Let's take a look. It does. So we can look at greater than or less than. If we do less than 3, that will return just me, because Ian has an ID of 3. And we can combine multiple rules here as well. So perhaps I want all the users who have an ID of less than 4 and also have a password. So password is not equal to nothing. So that should return just me, because it would return Ian and Rob, but Ian doesn't have a password. Let's try that again. Yep, just me, just to show that that's worked. If I do a less than 5, it should return Rob and Bethany. So we've got 2 people there to play with. Just like with if statements, you can use or statements, and that will return essentially everyone, because everyone has a password except for Ian, and Ian has an ID of less than 5. So an or statement in this case returns everything. Okay, so that's just a quick look at the where command and different ways that you can use that to restrict who you're selecting. We can also restrict what we actually select. So far we've been selecting everything. That's fine if you've got a small database and it's not particularly busy, but if you've got a very busy server and it's taking a lot of data from the database, selecting everything might be a lot more than you need. So we can restrict that by only selecting certain fields. So maybe we just want to select the name for some reason from our users. So don't forget we need our backticks, or at least not single quotes. So what does that look like now? There we go, we're only selecting the piece of information that we need. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. If you know what you're going to need from your query, it's much better to select just what you want rather than select everything by default, because that's going to give a much higher load on the server if and when your website gets hugely popular. So 2 more things I'd like to show you. The first one is calculating the number of rows that you get in your result. And that's very easily done. So just after this line where we've done our query, we can use the MySQL num rows command, and we just pass it the result from our query, and then if we echo that, we can see that we've got 5 there. So that's very useful for 2 reasons. One, it tells us whether we've got any results at all, is very useful. So we don't necessarily know that just from looking at the result. That will just tell us whether or not the query was successful. So if we don't have any results, we might not want to start cycling through them. Or we might want to do something else and say that the user couldn't be found when they're trying to log in, for example. So that's very useful. And in some cases, you might want to know whether the number of rows is high enough to paginate the results. That is, put them in lots of pages, and then knowing that straight away without actually having to cycle through can be very useful. The last thing I'd like to show you is a great way of escaping characters. Now let's just edit Ian's name here. I need to log in again. In fact, let's do it with a query. So, quick challenge for you. Can you update Ian's name in the database so that instead of Ian, it's Ian McNeil? So let's update our database. And I want to change Ian's name. So I'm going to update users, set name equals, I want it to be Ian O'Neill. I need single quotes there and a backslash to escape that character, where ID equals, what's his ID, 3, and we'll limit 1 just in case. Then let's run that query, update that, take a look. So there we go, Ian O'Neill. Excellent. So what if we wanted to select someone from this database by their name, but we didn't know who it was? So someone's inputted their name and we wanted to select their details from the database. If that's the case, we can't just backslash in front of the single quote there, because we don't know whether or not there is one. So how do we deal with that? Let's find out. So we'll just quote all of that out for the moment. So if we want to select name from users where the name is equal to some variable that we don't know the value of, take a moment to see what I've done there. I've got single quotes and then I've ended the string, inputted a name variable, and then started the string back up again to end my quote. So if my name is, or if the name that I'm looking for is Ian O'Neill, then this is going to have a problem, because it's not going to work. It's going to end that single quotes string when it hits that single quote inside the string there. So the function that we use in this is called MySQL real escape string. So we just enter it there, MySQL real escape string, and then we apply that function to the name, and then what that will do, that will escape all of the characters for us that might cause problems. So in this case we're interested in the single quotes, but there are various other ones that might cause us trouble somewhere down the line. So now if I run that, it should just return 0. So let's add MySQL real escape string, and we send the first variable is the name of the database link, so in this case link, and the second variable is name. There we go. Let's take a look. So that's worked really well. Just to show you, if we tried to do it without that, it would indeed, the whole command failed because the syntax wasn't right. So there we've covered how to select reasonably complicated queries. So users where the ID was greater than something or the name began with a certain character. And we've also selected specific fields from the database. And we've learned how to count the number of rows of our result and to escape tricky characters that might cause us problems. Now we're very close to our target goal of achieving a great login system at the end of this chapter. But first there's a couple of elements of PHP that we need to cover that I've put off covering until now that we know our MySQL basics, but they're crucially important for running any kind of login system with a PHP and MySQL backend. So the first of those is session variables. So by a session variable, we mean a variable which is stored as long as the user is connected to the website and has the page active on their browser. So normally, if we get rid of all of this and start up a variable, if I create a variable, so temp equals hello, and display it. I get my variable, great. But if I then remove the definition and reload the page, the variable is gone. So each time you load a PHP page, most variables just disappear. They need to be recreated each time. So with a login system, generally you want to store something about the user on the server so that we know that the user is logged in. And to do that, we use a session command first, which is session_start, like that. Crucially, that command must happen before you display any HTML or code on your page at all. So if I did some code and then started my session, that wouldn't work. So the session has to be started before you go anywhere near the HTML of your code. So now I can open a session variable in a similar way to how we do get and post variables. I can do session like that with the underscore at the beginning, and then let's say I've got a login ID and I set that equal to 1. Now let's display the login ID. There we go, so there's my login ID, it's equal to 1. So now if I remove my instruction to create that variable and I refresh the page, the login ID is still 1. So that variable will stay active until the user closes all the windows in their browser which are connected to that site. Now, we can actually keep our session variables across different pages. So if I create a new file, let's call it loggedin.php, and open that file. Now I need to start my session on this file, just like I did on the other one. So session start, and if I now print out the session variable, or the session array I should say, if I then go to loggedin.php, then I've got access to the login ID from that other script. So I've got two completely different scripts here. Crucially, they have to be on the same server. Sessions are server specific or website specific, but you can access the session variables from any page which has this session start. Now notice if I remove session start from the logged in page and I refresh, then we've lost it. In fact, if I now go back to my index.php, we've still got it there, so it's not completely lost, but it's not working at loggedin.php until I bring the session start back, and then we've got our logged in variable back. So session variables are great for creating a temporary session, so when the user doesn't want to stay logged in once they've quit this particular session. So what if you want the user to be able to stay logged in longer than just for this browser session? To do that, we use cookies. Now, cookies have got themselves a bit of a bad name because they were used by a number of large companies to track users beyond their website. But they're still a very useful trick, and the only way, or at least the best way, of keeping users logged into your website for a long period of time. You should always get consent from your users before you set a cookie, but once you've got that consent, i.e. you've asked them to remain logged in, then they're a really good trick to use. So let's see how we do it. Very simple as always. As with these sessions, we need to set our cookies before the HTML output begins. So let's do that. We use the command setCookie, and then we enter the key for the cookie. So in this case, it might be ID. Then we enter the value for the cookie. So let's say my ID is 1234. And the last attribute is the time that we want the cookie to expire. So the way we do that is we use the time function to get the time in seconds right now, and then we add to that the number of seconds that we want the cookie to exist for. So let's say we want the user to remain logged in for 24 hours. Then we would do 60 times 60 times 24 to get the number of seconds in 24 hours. Now, if you wanted them to remain logged in for a really, really long time, you could times that by 365. That would give you a year's login. I wouldn't recommend that kind of length of time, but you might want to do a week or even slightly longer than that. But you can set it to anything you like. So this will keep them, or at least the cookie, existent for 24 hours after it's created. So let's set our cookie. There we go. Can't actually read it. But let's now find out what the value is. So echo, and we use the cookie variable. That should really be in capitals. Again, it's a system variable that we can access. So cookie ID is 1234. And just like with sessions, we can access that cookie variable from anywhere. So if I want to access it from my index.php file, I can. Notice we don't actually need a session start this time. Cookies are there by default. If the cookie's been created, then we'll be able to access it. We don't need a session start or cookie start or anything like that. So if I run my index.php file, there it is. My cookie is 1234. Great, so the only other thing we want to know about cookies is how to get rid of them when the user logs out, or we want to get rid of them for some other reason. We simply have to set the cookie's expiry date to be in the past. So we use the setCookie function again. And we enter the name of the cookie. Once again, we need to give the value of the cookie. It doesn't actually matter what the value is going to be if we want to make it expire. So we just make it empty most of the time. And then if you do something like time minus 3600, then that will set the expiry date of the cookie to be an hour in the past, effectively deleting it. So let's save that and refresh. You'll notice that the cookie still appeared there. That's because we actually need to do a page refresh after we set the cookie to expire. So if the cookie is still in existence when the page loads, we'll still be able to access it. So after you've set the cookie to expire, you do need to refresh the page to make it actually disappear. So if I now refresh the page again, it's gone. So that's sessions and cookies, and we've almost got everything that we need to create our login system. We're now one video away from being able to start creating our login system. We just need to know how to store passwords as securely as possible. Now, you've probably heard a number of reasonably high profile situations where companies have been hacked and the passwords have been revealed. Now, no website is actually immune from being hacked, but we can take as many precautions as we can to make sure that our users' passwords are secure and safe. So I'm going to show you 4 different levels of password security and try and convince you to use level 4 all the time. So level 1 of password security is pretty lame. So that's what we've done so far, which is simply to use the password and store it as plain text. So that's a very bad way to store passwords, because anyone who has access to that database can then just read the passwords off of your database, which is very bad for your users, because not only can they then access your system, but if they use the same password for their PayPal account or even their bank login, then the hackers can do some really quite damaging things to them. So we definitely don't ever want to store passwords as plain text. So what's our first way to encrypt passwords? Well, to encrypt passwords, we use something called a hash. And a commonly used hash is the instruction in PHP for MD5. Now, a hash is essentially a one-way encoding that encodes our password into a very long string of numbers and letters, which is very difficult to reverse encode. So if I take, for example, MD5 password, so if I've got a user who insists on using the word password as their password. Let's load up the right page. Then that is the hash, the MD5 hash of the word password. So what we could do is store that in our database. Now that's a fairly good level of security. It's very difficult to get from that to the original password, but there are methods that the hacker can use, and one of those is known as rainbow tables. Let me just show you a rainbow table. Now, rainbow tables are collections of commonly used passwords for which the MD5 encoding, or indeed other types of encoding, has been stored. So one example website that we can use to get these is crackstation.net. So if I then take my MD5 encoded password and put it into this system, I have to enter the captcha 462323838. Then you can see that it's actually come up with the result. So that's not a particularly secure way of storing your passwords. Now, if your user has a long random string as their password, then that should still be secure. So let's see. So that's my hash for that particular password. If I try and crack that, 4493625916127, it will search it and it hasn't found anything. So that's great. So if your user's passwords are secure and long, then hashing them will be enough. However, if they're not secure and they're commonly used, then hackers will be able to get their passwords from a long list of commonly used passwords and their associated hashes. So we really want to get round just using a hash to store users' passwords. So we're now on level 3 of encryption. So level 3 uses something called a salt. So what we do, we have another variable, let's call it salt. Just close down CrackStation there. And a salt is a random string of numbers and letters, like that. So it can be stored on your server in your files, but should definitely not be stored on the database, otherwise that makes its somewhat useless. And then all we do is we encode the password with the salt, and then we see what our MD5 string makes of that. So there it is. So now, even if our user has used a very common password, if we then get the hash of that and put it into crackstation.net, CrackStation, with any luck, won't be able to crack it. Excellent. So this now protects people with strong passwords as well as people with weak passwords. So we're looking pretty good now. It's only in the situation that the hacker gets your salt value that you become vulnerable. And you're still not that vulnerable. The hacker has to work quite hard to get the passwords of your users, but they still can, particularly, well, only for those who are using weak passwords. So there's one level 4 password protection that you can use, and that is using, instead of a fixed salt, which is the same every time, use a salt which is equal to some variable which is different for every user. So for example, you might want to use their ID or their email address. Let's see how that might work. So what we're doing there is we're taking the ID of the individual user, we're hashing that, i.e. applying the MD5 function to it, and then we're appending that to their password that they've entered, and then we're hashing that again. So that means that the salt is going to be different every time. So there's no way that the hacker can easily compare the different passwords to each other to work out what the salt similar weak passwords. So this is about as safe as you can make your passwords. Even vulnerable weak passwords are not going to be easily crackable when using a system like this. So that's how I'd recommend you hash your passwords in all the databases that you use. Congratulations on making it to the end of the MySQL section of the course. We're now in a position to make a complete web app. And the app that we're going to make is one called Secret Diary, which is going to be a fairly simple app where people can sign up and create an account, and then once they're logged in, they can keep a diary of their activities, their thoughts, whatever they like, and only they have access to it. They'll be able to create as many diary entries as they like and view them right there on the site. So that will enable us to practice a lot of the skills that we've learned all through the course. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and the PHP MySQL stuff as well. So I'm going to start with just looking at creating the login system. So before we confuse things with Bootstrap and making things look nice, we'll work on just creating a very basic form where the user can sign up and then log in, and that will enable us to work out how those bits work before we get into all the other stuff. So I'm going to clear my PHP file and then bring it up. Any test domain.work. There we go. So as with some of the previous challenges, I'd recommend following along on the video and then doing the smaller challenges when I suggest you do so. If you want to, however, have a go at it yourself, then please do. You do have pretty much all the skills that you need already. So feel free to give it a try all on your own. So we're going to start with a form, and this is initially going to be a sign up form, and we'll add a login form in a minute. So with our sign up form, we want to have an input for their email address. We'll give it a name of email and an ID of email. And we want an input type equals password, name equals password for the password, and finally we want a submit button with a value of sign up. And then let's close our form. Okay, let's take a quick look at that. There we go. So very simple, not a user-friendly form, but that's fine because we're just trying to work out how the backend is all going to fit together for the moment. So when the user enters their details, we need the script to do something. So let's add a name to our submit form, and then we can check if there is a submission, and then action that. So we should do some sort of validation first. So let's just check that the email and password are there and they're both valid. So that's your first challenge. Can you do the validation on this form to check whether the email and password are both present and that the email is a valid email? I hope you managed it. It would have been something like this. So if the email is missing, then we'll set the error to please enter your email. Now I'm going to add an else statement there. You'll notice that I haven't put the curly brackets around there. With PHP and indeed with JavaScript as well, you don't need curly brackets unless you're having more than one statement inside the function that you want to occur when the if statement is true. So if you've only got one line, then you don't need the curly brackets. So to keep things simple, I'm going to leave that. So if the email does exist, I want to check that it's a valid email. So the way we do that is with our filter var function, and we want to validate our email, and we want to check that it's an email. So we use filter validate email. So if that's not true, if it's not a valid email, then we'll set the error to please enter a valid email address. Okay, so that covers the email validation. With the password validation, let's first check that the password has been entered. and if not, we'll ask them to enter it. There we go, and this time we'll introduce a bit of basic password validation as well. So we'll say that it needs to be at least, say, 8 characters long and contain at least 1 capital letter. So if they have entered a password, we want to do a couple of things to it. So the first one will be to check how long it is. We can use a function called strlen, so string length, on our password. And so if the password length is less than 8, then we'll have an error of please enter a password with at least 8 characters. We can use a regex to check whether it's got at least 1 capital letter in it, and the regex looks like this. Use our backticks there. So essentially that looks for a letter between A and Z that is capitalized, and we want to check the password for that. And as before, we want to actually check if it's not got a capital letter in it. Please include at least 1 capital letter in your password. Okay, so that looks good. I think that's all the validation we need. You can obviously add other password validation to yours if you like. Do have a look around and find out ways to do that. It's reasonably straightforward and there's a lot of documentation on the web. So if error echo there were errors in your sign up details, and then we'll display the errors. Just remember that we need to put line breaks at the beginning to avoid all the errors appearing on one line. There we go. Okay, let's just run that. Okay, if I run that, we get an error. Anyone spotted what the error is? We need to set the method of the form to post, otherwise we get get variables, which we don't want. So let's give it another try. Okay, so it's generally accepting that we haven't entered any details. If I put a password that's too short and doesn't have a capital letter, that's great. If I do one that does have a capital letter but is still too short, excellent. And the invalid email address, because we've used a type of email, that's going to get picked up by the browser anyway. So I think we're quite safe. It's definitely accepted that there was a valid email there. Okay, so I'm happy with our validation. So if there's an error, then do that. If not, we want to sign up the user. So how do we do that? Well, we need to insert them into the database, but we want to do something before we insert them into the database. We have to check that their email address doesn't already exist, because we can't have two users with the same email address. So how are we going to check that? Well, we need to connect to the database, and then we need to do a query for this email address that they've entered. So the next challenge is for you to do that. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste the code from the creation of the database before. You may have used a different database. In fact, you probably will have. So you'll have slightly different entries there, but as long as you use MySQL connect, then you'll be fine. And we'll add a link statement in there so that we can do our link commands. Now we want to do a query, and we want to select, we'll just select everything for now, from our users table, where email is equal to the posted email address. Okay, now that query will work, but we've got a big problem here. They can use, or hackers can use, something called SQL injection if you just put your database inputs like that. The way that database injection works is if you enter an email address, if I go back over to the login form, I could enter my email address to be something like a single quote and then a bracket and a semicolon, and the SQL interpreter would interpret that as, let's end this SQL command and then start a new one. So then you can do select star from users, and then it will return all of the users' details. So that's a very straightforward SQL attack which we want to guard against. And the way that we do that is we use the same command that we used before, MySQL I real escape string, and then link and the email address. So that will escape all of the characters that could do any damage to our database. So that should solve all our problems, and definitely whenever you're running a query on your database that involves some text that the user has entered or could possibly have edited, then you need to use this MySQL I real escape string instruction. Otherwise you'll be vulnerable to SQL injections. Okay, now we want to run that query. So MySQL I query, our query, and we'll set that equal to result. And we want to we're only interested in whether or not there are any results for this query. So we'll say results equals MySQL num rows, MySQL I, old habits die hard, result. So this results variable will store a number which will either be the number of items in the database or 0, and we really want it to be 0. So let's run this and see how it looks. But just before we do, I don't know if any of you noticed my mistake. Up here we need to put a link in before we run our query, and I'm also going to just echo results so that we can see the results from our database there. Okay, so let's refresh that. Okay, so I'm going to start by putting an email address that I know is in the database. Great, it's returned a 1. So it's done that correctly. It's looked in the database and found out that there is someone there. If I just put any other email address in and a valid password, it's returned a 0. Great, so that looks like it's returning what we want. So if results, we want to create an error. So for the moment we'll just echo that email address is already registered. And we'll ask them because probably they're using the wrong form by mistake. So it's probably that they want to log in rather than sign up. Okay, so that's if they're in the database already. So if they're not in the database, then we want to put them in. So we're now ready. We're convinced that they're not already a user, and we're convinced that the email address is valid and the password is of a reasonable level of complexity. So let's go. We'll create a new query. Insert into users, and we want to create an email and a password. Let's put backticks around those just to be on the safe side. And we want to use values of, now for our email, we can just use the same code that we used up here. So that will do for our email. Now for our password, we're going to use hashing. When we use hashing, we don't need to use MySQL iReal escape string because the hashing will take out any characters that they're using that could cause trouble anyway. So we're going to do an MD5 hash on a combination of an MD5 hash of their email address. So that's email and the password that they've entered. Like that. So we've entered those values. Now we just need to end the MySQL query with the close single quote and a close bracket and a double quote there. So let's just remind ourselves what we've done there. We've hashed the email address, so we're using that as our salt essentially, and we're then combining that with the password, and we're then hashing that again. So that's as secure as we can reasonably be. And we need a dot there as well, I think. Okay. Then let's run that query. So MySQL I query and link query. Great, and then we'll give them a message. For the moment we'll just say you've been signed up. Okay, let's run that through. So new email at gmail.com, and then big long password, sign up. Okay, it's looking good. Is that user there on our table? There they are. So they don't have a name obviously because we haven't asked for a name here, but they've got their email address and that's their nicely salted password. And they've got an ID that's been created for them by the system. Fantastic, so our sign up form is now working. We now need to make sure that they are logged in once they have signed up. So to log the user in, we want to create a session variable. Remember, a session variable is a variable that's stored on the server and will remain active as long as the user's browser window remains live. and the connection to the server is established. So that's a good system to use for a login. We could use cookies as well, but we'll go for sessions for simplicity. So to create a new session variable, we just use the session array, and we'll create a variable called ID. And ideally we want to set that to the ID of the user that we've just inserted into the database. That's actually very easy to find. There's a function MySQL I insert ID. And that function will just return the ID of the user that's most recently been inserted into the database. So that's exactly what we want. We need to pass the function the link variable, that is, we need to state the connection that we're referring to. Okay, and to use session variables, we do need to start the session, so we'll do that at the very beginning of the script. Okay, let's just display the session and do a test sign up to make sure that's worked. So we'll do another test and sign up. Great. So now we've been signed up and we have an ID in our session array of 11. So now the system knows who the user is that's logged in. The last thing that we'll want to do with our user is redirect them to the page that they can actually start working on their diary. So for the moment, I'll just put a little note in, redirect to logged in page. And then we'll deal with the redirect when we've sorted out a couple of other things that we need to do with the login system. So the first is I want to display the email address and password that the user has entered in here if they make a mistake. So for example, if they put a bad email address out, which they can't do, okay, let's forget that as an option. But if they put a bad password, one that's too short, for example, then they'll get an error, but again, as we saw in the last session, the email address and password that they entered is not showing up, so it just means they have to type the whole thing again, which is a little bit annoying. So see if you can remember how to fix that and how to display the email address and password that they entered when they signed up. So I hope you remembered, it's just a matter of setting a value to the input, and then we'll use a bit of PHP to display the password. There we go. I'll just show you a small useful trick. There is a chance that they've put double quotes into their password, or indeed into their email address, and if they've done that, then this is going to cause an error. Now HTML isn't going to display properly, so we can use a function called add slashes to get around that, and that add slashes will just add backslashes to all the characters that might cause problems with our script. And that will then get around any issues. If they have got double quotes in their password, it won't cause any problems with our HTML. So I'm now going to copy that into the email field and just change it to post email there. So if I now try that again, have a test. And there you go, you can see we've got the email addresses already registered. Do you want to log in? And then we're given the password and the email address, so they don't have to type it in again. Okay, great. The last thing I want to do then before we actually go in and create this system is create a login form. So just straight underneath the previous form, it's going to look very similar. So I'll copy it here. So login, best to separate out the two forms. So there we go. We've now got login email, login password, email and password, and we've changed the submit value to login. So let's just do a login. Now you notice that we've got here, if the submit button, the submit variable exists at all, then this will happen. It will try and sign them up. Now we don't really want that, because we want the submit value to have two possible values. So it could be sign up or it could be login. So we want to check if the submit variable has a value of sign up, then do the sign up script. And if it has a value of login, then we'll action the login script there. Okay, so this time we'll do away with the validation for the email and the password, and we'll just try and find a user with the email and password that they have entered. So if post submit is equal to login, then we'll do our login script. Now this time we'll do away with the validation on the email address and the password, and we'll just check whether or not the user is there and has that password that they've entered. So, quick challenge for you. Can you create a couple of lines to check for the user with an email and password that they've entered in the database? Okay, I hope you did something like query equals select star from users where email is, and we want to use the MySQL real escape function. Otherwise, we could have some serious problems if people want to hack into our database, and we use link to refer back to the database link that we want to connect to, and then post, and we want to use login email this time. In fact, I'll just stretch out the screen so you can see the whole thing in one go. So select star from users where email is that, and password is, in fact we don't need to use the real escape string here, but what we'll use is exactly the same script that we had here. So MD5, and remember what we're doing there is hashing the email address and then connecting that to the password and then hashing that again. So we're creating a really secure password system. Now the email that we want to hash this time is login email, and the password is login password. Okay, and we'll have a limit 1 because we only want to check for one user. And that's the end of our query. So just to cover that all again, we've got select star from users where email, so the email address in the database is equal to the escaped string of the login email post variable, and the password is equal to the hashed password connected with the email address, and then we're limiting it to just one result. Okay, now we want to action this query. So MySQL query link query, And now we want to view the result from this query. So we'll create a row variable and set it equal to MySQL fetch array result, and we mustn't forget to actually set the query, or the output of the query, to be equal to the result variable there. Okay. Now one thing, this won't actually work in its current form because, if you can work out why not, because the link connection is actually inside the sign up bit of the code, and we don't want that. So now let's move it out so that we connect to our database regardless, and then we can access the link from either the sign up or the login area of our code. And for now, let's just display the results of that so that we can see that it's correctly taken it from the database. Okay, let's give that a go. See what happens. So I'll create a yet another new one, and one that I actually know the password of this time. So we'll call it test3@test.com, and the password will be password with a capital P. There we go. So that's that. So now if I log in, actually it saved that for me, that's handy. If I now log in there, brilliant. It's found the user and returned the password details. Fantastic. Okay, so in reality I don't actually want to display the row. Really, I just want to see if it exists. So if it exists, then, or if it returns a value, I want to do the same as before. So I want to create a session ID. Now this time I can't use the MySQL insert ID function because I haven't actually inserted anything into the database. So how can I get the ID of the result or the user that we've just found in the database? Hopefully you realized that we can just use the row array with the ID selector there. So that will then return this number here, number 12. So now we've created the session, and we'll have redirect to logged in page there as well. We'll sort that out when we've got a logged in page to redirect to. And if they're not logged in, for the moment we'll just display an error. That will be because we could not find the user in the database. So find a user with that email and password. Please try again. So that would be the point in your website to offer them a password reminder system, or some other way to access their account if they've forgotten their password, or indeed their email address. We're not going to go into that level of detail in this project, but we might do at some future point. So look out for future videos for things like password reminders, which are quite commonly used. Right, let's just check that then. So if I try and log in with the correct email address but the wrong password, then it returns can't find the user. Fantastic. And just because I like to be sure, or essentially it's more useful to try and fix things at this stage rather than work out why a user isn't properly logged in later on. There we go. Brilliant. So it's created the session and set that equal to the row variable. Great. Now, what we've got here is a big mass of PHP code and then our HTML form. I'd quite like to separate those two out. So what I'm going to do is take this PHP code and put it into a separate file, because I don't want to have the whole of this project in a single file. It's just going to get very messy and very difficult to deal with. So I'm going to cut all of that. I'm going to bring in my FireFTP and I'm going to create a couple of files. So the first one I'm just going to call login.php, and I'm going to edit that and paste that into my code. And the second I'm going to call connection.php. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do with that. This connection link here, we're probably going to need in a number of places in our application. So rather than have the actual code put there in several different places, which means that if I change the password to the database, I need to find every place that I've put that in my code. Better to actually have a single file which connects to the database and have a single connection link instruction in that file. So I'm going to edit connection.php and put the link code in there. Like that. Okay. Now, how do I actually include a PHP file in another? There's a very handy function called include. So you just enter include and then connection.php, and then that will include the connection.php script and run the script inside the login.php function. Okay, so now we've got login.php. So we now need to include login.php in our index.php. So that's just neatened everything up. We can see where everything is and we haven't got everything in one massive file. Always good once you've done something like that to actually check that your script still works. Looking good. Great. So everything still works as before. It's just a lot neater and a lot better organized. So now that our login and sign up form are working, I think it's time to make this look quite a bit prettier and apply a bit of Bootstrap and just make the whole thing look a lot better, much more user-friendly. So I'm going to switch back over to my Bootstrap code for a second. And I'm just going to take that as it is and copy it into my code here. And we'll just put the form into memory for the moment. And we'll sort that out shortly. Okay, great. So that's now got our code there, but of course it's not displaying properly because we need to copy over the Bootstrap files as well. So back over to FireFTP. And what I'll do is I'll just download the CSS, the fonts, and the JavaScript. And I'll just download the background.jpg file as well, just so it all looks nice. And then I'm going to upload those to my new project. Okay, if I now refresh, I'll try that again. Refresh, there we go. Excellent. Yeah, I didn't copy that image, so that didn't stay there. Okay, this time we're just going to have a single login page at the front. So let's get rid of everything else. So we just want that top div and the menu bar there. Great. And let's just quickly change the code. I'm not going to worry too much about this code. So we'll just call it secret diary there and up here as well. I'm going to drop those items from the menu bar because we don't need those anymore. We're just going to keep the login form. And then we'll just put some text here. Your own private diary with you wherever you go. And then interested, sign up below. Okay, now we just need to change this form into a successful sign-up form. In fact, have a quick go. So can you change this form to work with our sign-up system that we created a few moments ago? Right, so the first thing to do was to switch the method to post. And now this time we do want some labels. And obviously you can display your form however you like, but I'm going to do it like this. So label for, this is going to be the sign up form. So it's just going to be for email. And we'll call it email address and the label. And we need to add name equals email there. We've got a type of submit there. We want to add a name of submit so that our form can pick it up, and we want to give it a value of sign up. Great, and now we need to copy that and add a password field. So this is going to be label for password. The type is a password. Name is password. And we'll put a placeholder of just password. And the last thing we need to do is add a bit of code to display the user's email and password if they've entered it incorrectly. So add slashes post email. There we go. And then we'll copy that down. Password there. Great. Let's just take a look at that. Okay. Looks nice. Now the form isn't quite displaying properly. I think there's a couple of issues in my code. One, maybe you noticed this when I typed it in. We could do with removing that M from the label, that typo. So it should be 4 is email. And this is no longer a standalone input, so we want to change the class to form group, not input group. Okay, much better. So there's our nice login system, and again, let's have a look. Yeah, it expands really nicely to full screen as well. Great. Okay, so that's our sign up form. Let's get our login form working with our system as well. So where are we? Over here. I'll expand it so that you can see what we're doing. So another quick challenge for you. Can you change the login form so that it's going to work with our login system? I hope you started by changing the method to post. And then we just need to add a name for the email. So name is going to be login email, and name is going to be login password for the password. They've got nice placeholders in them already, so we'll leave those as they are. And we'll just set the value to login email. There we go. You noticed I didn't put PHP on there. It's not actually a strict requirement to add the PHP. It will work without the PHP, but it's definitely good practice to put the PHP in there. And then let's copy that down. So login password. Great, so those two forms should now work with our login system. Let's give them a try. Just refresh the page. I'll start with the login here, so test3, and then password with a capital P. What's gone wrong there? Any ideas? We've got an issue with this button. It hasn't actually detected that we've tried to log in at all. What we need to do is actually change the button to an input with a type of submit, and then change the value of that input to log in. Without that, it's just a button. It doesn't actually submit a particular value in our form. So now it's an input and it has a value of login. So it should allow us to log in. So I'll just refresh first. Notice it has picked up the details that we put in, although we've lost them now. Password. One more thing. We need to give it a name of submit. Otherwise it won't pick it up in the submit variable. Let's reload the page, and this time, keep your fingers crossed. Now it might look like nothing's happened there, but if we look at the source code of the page and then resubmit, we have got our login ID. It's just that it's not displaying because of the Bootstrap CSS there. So that's looking good. Of course, we're going to need a better way of displaying our error messages and things like that, because they're not in fact displaying at all. So we'll assume that the sign up form works for the moment now as well, and we want to create a nice new sort of alert box for if the user is unsuccessful at logging in. So your next challenge is have a go at that. So make it so that the error message doesn't appear at the top of the page where we can't see it, but it appears in a nice big alert box which tells the user clearly what they need to do. Okay, I hope you started by going to the login function, the login script, and then notice that we've just echoed out the error straight away there. Now that's no good, so we need to save the error as a variable and then display it later on in our page. So for now we'll say if there's been an error, then we'll add, or we'll change the error script to be there were errors in your sign-up details, and then give them the error. And same thing down here. If they're already logged in, we don't want to display that. We want to create it as an error. And those are all our errors. Oh no, there's one more there. So error there. So we've got 3 different places where we may have set up our error variable, well, and a few more at the top. So now if we go back to our index.php file, where shall we have our error message? I think perhaps below the text there. So that would be here. So we can now bring in a bit of PHP code and just look for the presence of an error function. So if there's an error, then we want to display the error alert. So we can just echo that. So we'll display a div, the class of alert. Oh, now I need to be careful with my double quotes there. So I'll have single quotes around the whole thing, and that will allow me to use double quotes in my HTML code. Class equals alert, and alert danger. And then we'll just display the error message there. I'm going to add slashes just in case we have any problems, but we're creating this error code ourselves, so we'll probably be fine. And then close the div. Okay. That should do it. So now if I try and sign up with an email address and a bad password, we get a nice error message there. Excellent. Let's just make sure that works on the login as well. So if I log in with an email that doesn't exist, we get an error there as well. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm liking our sign up and login form. It's all working and it's all looking nice and pretty. So now we actually need to create the application that we want the user to use. So let's create a new PHP file and base our application on that. So create file, I'll call it main page.php. Okay, and the bulk of the HTML of this page is going to be the same as this code here. We want to put the bootstrap in, so we'll just copy everything over. From the index file. I'm just copying that and pasting it in there. We don't want to include the login part of the top, but we're going to have a new function for this. And let's just change the title to Secret Diary. While we're here, we'll change the title for this one too. We don't want to call it Bootstrap 101 template. And main page there. So Let's switch over to our main page and start working on that. There we go. So at the moment it looks exactly the same. Now we need to change the code a little bit. Secret diary is fine, but we don't want to give them an option to log in if they're on the main page, because they will be already logged in. So let's just change this to a simple log out button. So we need a UL of class navbar nav. Close the UL and then just an li with our link. We'll sort out the href in a minute. And log out. Close the link. Close the list item. What's gone wrong there? Oh, we need the actual class should be navbar dash nav. There we go, much nicer. So there's our logout button. I think we want to put the logout on the top right. That's the usual place to put it on a website. So let's do that. There's an easy way to do that on Bootstrap. You may have come across it. You just give it a class of pull right. And then if we have a look, looks good. Now we don't actually need the collapse button this time. It's a little bit redundant when you've only got one option on the navbar, so let's get rid of it. So we'll keep the brand there, but we want to get rid of this button. And we want to get rid of the class collapse. Now we've got the issue that the logout button has fallen below the navbar header div here. Fixing that is fairly straightforward. We just need to pull left on the header div, and that will make that float left and the logout float right. Great. Okay, now we'll deal with the actual functioning of the logout button a little bit later on. Let's just sort out the main page here. So we really want to get rid of all of this content. We don't want that sign up form at all. Let's keep our divs for the moment though, because we'll likely want those. Okay, so now we've got a nice blank page to work with. So all we want for our content of this page is just a single nice big blank sheet, essentially. So a text area where the user can enter their thoughts and whatever they want to into their diary. So very simply, text area, give it a class of form control, and then close it out. Let's just take a look at that. Okay, very nice. We want it to stretch the height of the screen, so let's use a script to do that. We're only going to have one text area, so we can just refer to it as text area, and then give it a CSS of height and set that to, now we don't quite want it to be window height, because if we do that it'll be too tall and go off the bottom, so let's just experiment a bit. Perhaps window height minus 100 pixels will do it. Let's take a look, that's better, but it's still a little bit all the way to the bottom there, so we'll subtract 120. See how that looks? Great. Okay, I'm liking that. Now, we want the user to be able to input their personal thoughts. I'd rather avoid having a big submit button there for update. It would be much nicer if the whole thing could auto update, and that would be great. So that's what we're going to try and achieve here. I'm just thinking we could move that up a touch. We've got a gap there that I don't think we need. So let's change the margin at the top of top row to be 80. Have a little look at that. That's better. And then let's add a few pixels at the bottom, so minus 110. Great. Okay, I think that looks nice. And again, if we stretch it out, still looks good. I don't think we want it to stretch across the whole width of a large screen. I prefer having it centered like that, but it's up to you. It's reasonably easy to change, and I'll leave that up to you. You can just adjust the columns there if you want to. So how are we going to update this field in the database? Well, let's add a database entry for it first of all. So if we go over to the database and click on users, I've logged out, so I need to log back in again. There's my password. So here we want to add a new field to our users table which contains the content of their diary. So it's very simple to do. We'll just hit structure and then add one column at the end of the table, and we'll call it diary and give it a type of text. Great. So now all the users have a diary column, and when we go back to our script, then what we're going to want is every time the user updates their diary, they will find that the diary is updated automatically in the database. So how are we going to achieve that? Well, the way we're going to do it is have a separate PHP file which is responsible for updating the diary field in the database, and then we're going to call that file using Ajax in our script every time the actual diary content is updated. So it's quite a neat way of getting around the issue of not having to submit every time, but we've got an autosave that happens as we go along. So first of all, let's set up the PHP script. So we'll go down to FireFTP, and we'll create a new script, create a file, and we'll call it update diary.php. And now let's start working on that script. So create our PHP tags. We're going to need to connect to the database. So let's include connection.php. Now we're going to send the text area field as a post variable to this script here. So all we need to do is update the database and set the value of diary to be equal to the post field with the name of diary for that particular user. So I'll set that as a quick challenge for you to have a go at. I hope you got there. We're going to need to start with a query, and we want to update the table users, and we want to set diary equal to, and we'll use our MySQL real escape string function. And we're going to apply that to the diary post variable. Like that. Let's stretch this out so you can see what's going on. So we're updating diary to the value of the post diary string escaped so that we don't have any hacking problems. And we want to do that where the ID of the user is equal to our session ID. And we'll pop a limit 1 on the end just in case, because we definitely only want to update one entry here. Okay, you'll notice that we're using the session variable, so we definitely want to start our session. There we go. And now we want to action that query. Sorry. SQLi query, link, and query. Great, that should do the trick. I want to just test that that is indeed working before I start calling it with Ajax. So I'm going to load the file, update diary.php. It doesn't do anything yet. Let's just check that our session is still active. Yes, it is. Great. So that should work fine. We just need to pass a post variable to it, so we'll create a quick kind of dummy form. And it's just going to have a single input, which needs to have a name of diary. And it's going to need a submit button as well. Okay, so that's our bare bones form, and we should be able to use that to update the diary field in our database. Just before we run that, I wonder if you've noticed the bug in my code there. I haven't added the link variable to the MySQL real escape string function. So without that, it won't return anything at all. Okay, so let's just put a bit of text in there and submit that, and then we have a look on our database. Keep our fingers crossed. There we go. Great. So our system works. When we pass a post variable to this bit of Ajax, it will, or this bit of PHP, sorry, it will update the database. Great. Okay, so I'm done with that. So now we need to run our script whenever the user updates the text area field. So I want to be on main page .php. So we can do that by selecting the text area again. And we can use a function keyUp, which essentially runs a function or a set of code when the user types anything into the box, just like that. Okay, let's take a look. So it works in the same way as the click function that we've seen a lot of. So we just type function and then put our code in curly brackets. So for the moment, we'll just alert changed. So if I type something there, changed pops up. Great. So now we're going to want to call Ajax and do a post to our PHP script to update the diary script in the background. Now, to keep things simple, I'm going to use the jQuery post function here. But in implementation, you probably want to use the Ajax function because that will allow you to do things if the function fails, if their connection goes down, and alert the user that they need to connect to the internet in order to keep their changes. But to keep things simple for now, It works very similarly to the get function. So we want to run the function post, and we're posting to the update diary.php script. And then we just give the values of the variables that we want to post. So we keep them in curly brackets like that. And I'll just finish off my post function. And we only actually want to send one value, and that's diary. And we want to set diary equal to the value of our text area field. So again, very simple. Text area val. So what that will do, it will post updated diary.php with the content of the text area field as the diary variable. So that should do it. Let's take a look. So just refresh the page. Now let's just enter some text. So let's just write my diary for now. And then let's take a look in the database. There we go, it's updated straight away. So I could add any amount of text here and all would be well. So notice I haven't clicked submit or anything at all there. I've just entered my text. And there's the text that I've entered. So that's a really great way to update a database without the user even noticing that it's going on. It's just chunking away in the background using the Ajax jQuery post function. Great, so we're getting pretty near the end of this challenge where we have our diary and it updates, and we can log in and sign up. We've got a couple of things that we need to fix before we're done. The first one is, of course, if I refresh this page, my diary is lost because there's nothing that actually tells the script to input the data from the database into the text area. But that's easy enough to do. So there's a number of different ways we could do it. I'm just going to put a script into here which displays a diary variable which will be equal to the value of the diary in the database. Now we want to actually create this diary variable, so let's do that at the top. We could do that right there and then and it would work, but I don't really want to bring in that much PHP code into the HTML of my page. So instead, let's go up here and start our session. And then a quick challenge for you. Oops, session start maybe. A quick challenge for you. Can you go into the database, get the diary variable for the current user, and then set it, or set the variable diary equal to that? I hope you managed it. Reasonably straightforward. We're going to need to include the connection file. So now hopefully you can see why we've included that as a separate file, because we've used it maybe 4 times now, and this is a very simple application. So definitely it's always a good idea to keep your connection credentials in a separate file and then always reference that file whenever you want to access the database. And then we'll create a query. So we want to select everything from, in fact, we could be slightly more efficient about it because we only want the diary variable. So we could select diary from users where the ID is equal to the session ID. Now we have full control over the session ID. It's a server variable. It can't be edited by the user, so we don't need to do MySQL escape on it. We could do if we wanted, and that would be fine. If you're very security conscious, you might want to, but we're fairly safe with a session variable that we have full control over. So where ID is equal to that, I'll pop a limit 1 on the end just because I like to. And then we need to run the query, so MySQL query. We'll set that equal to a variable called result, and then we'll have a row variable which we're equal to MySQL fetch array result. Great, and then finally we just need to select or create a diary variable and put that equal to the diary value from our row array. Great, let's take a look. Just before we do, hopefully you noticed I need to have a link variable in my MySQL query function to make this work. Let's have a look. Brilliant. Okay, so now we have our diary text. Let's just add some more text. Here's some more text. And now when I refresh the page, that more text is there. Brilliant. So the user is going to be able to access this diary from any device. And once they're logged in, it's going to synchronize and update automatically as long as they're connected to the web. Brilliant. So now we just have a couple of issues with our login system. So we've got our logout button first of all. How are we going to make that work? Well, there's a few different ways that we could do it. Perhaps you want to spend a few moments thinking about how you would do it. The way I'm going to do it is pretty straightforward. So I'm going to make the href, so the location of the logout link, to index.php, and then I'm just going to create a get variable using the question mark and then set logout equal to 1. And then we'll go back over to our index.php file, and in the login area we'll create a little script that if the get variable logout is equal to 1, then we'll log them out. So we're done with mainpage.php now. So we'll go back to index.php. I think that is the latest version, but I'm actually just going to reload it from here just in case we lost our connection. Keep changes there. Let's close that down and close that down and reload it. It's often a good idea just to do that if you haven't worked with a file for a while, just to make sure that you are working with the latest version on the server. Okay, so now if I just refresh that and click log out, I go back to my main page here. Of course, we do have our logout variable, but the PHP code doesn't do anything with it yet. So I could put this code directly in the index.php file, but really it would make more sense to put it in the login.php file, and then I don't have PHP all over the place. So let's open that up again. And then very simply, after the session start command, we'll look for a get variable with a value of, or with a name, sorry, of logout and a value of 1. Then we want to do the logging out. So one way to do that would be just to set the value of the session variable to nothing or to 0, but I'm going to show you a new function which is session destroy. And that simply removes any session variables that are currently in existence. So if you've got a system which uses a number of different session variables for whatever reason, then that one will just get rid of all of them. So it's a nice general kind of log out function. Now it would be good to tell the user that they've been logged out rather than just give them a blank screen. So let's create a message. You have been logged out, Why not wish them a nice day? Great. And then back in our index.php file, we can check for the existence of the message function and add an alert to let them know. So we can do this here. In fact, I'll just copy that code. So if the message option exists, then we'll display a success message with whatever the message is. So obviously we're only going to have one message, so I could have just put the code right in there, but this now gives you the option to have other messages, other kind of success messages that you might want to have if you're going to develop the application any further. So let's just refresh that, see how it works. So logged out equals 1. There we go. So now we've got our nice clear "you have been logged out" message. Great, now we're really close to being finished. One thing you may have noticed that our application doesn't do is actually log the user in. So it creates the session, but it doesn't actually redirect them to the login page. Oh, sorry, to the main page file. So let's go back to our login.php file. And you'll remember we left a bit of code here. So we now no longer want to create the session, to display the session. We just want to redirect to the logged in page. So very simply, we use a function in PHP called header, and we're sending a header to the browser essentially to redirect to a specific page. So you can use this to redirect in your PHP scripts any way you like, but it does have to be run a bit like sessions. It has to be run before the output of your file actually begins. So you can't run a header function down after the HTML has been created. Fortunately, nothing's been created here, so we're fine. So we just want to redirect to main page.php. And the same thing needs to happen when they're logged in. So we don't want to display the session, we just want to redirect them to main page.php. So let's try this out. You'll see my browser's now saved my email address and password, so I can log in. Great, and there we go, there's the diary entry I created earlier. If we now log out, we get a nice log out message. Let's just do another test and sign up as a new user. So test 4, and we'll use the same password. Sign up, great. Yep, you can save that password. So we've got an empty diary here. Another diary entry. And then we'll just log out and log back in again. See if that works. So I'm now going to just make it so that I've gone straight to the page, and then I don't want to sign up this time, I want to log in. So now entering test 4, test.com, and password. There we go. So let's sign up with a new email address, new test.com, and the same password. Great, so now we're logged in. We'll save the password. This is some new content. So first of all, let's just refresh the page and see, yep, it's picked up the new content, put it in the database, and reloaded it. And then if we now log out and try and log back in again with the password. Oop, did I enter that correctly? There we go. Brilliant. So it's saved our content there. Great, so now we can log in, sign up and log out, and everything's pretty smooth. Couple of things just to tidy things up a bit. One thing you may have noticed is if the logout equals 1 function is there, then it's going to display this logout function or this logout text even if we haven't actually just logged out. So if, for example, I log out and then for some reason I sign up as a new user but use an email address which has already been registered, then we're still going to get that logged out message even though we haven't logged out that time. So we definitely want to change that. And an easy way to do that is simply to add a check, put a plugin, a check that when we look for the logout get variable, we also check to see if the user's actually logged in. So we look for the value of session ID. So it will only then log you out if you're already logged in. If you're not logged in, then it won't do anything. So let's see what happens now. If I now refresh that, it shouldn't give me the logged out message. There we go. So if I now try and sign up, I should just get the sign up error. There we go, not the logout message. So now it's only going to log me out if I'm already logged in, even if this get variable appears in the URL. So that's it. We've come to the end of the MySQL challenge for the course, and we've done a lot there. I hope you've managed to follow all the way along. So we've got a secure sign up and login system that we've created from scratch. We've got a nice secret diary homepage. You might want to change the background of this homepage a little bit because it's the same as the one we used before. So just have a look through the websites I showed you before to find a nice picture to use as the background. But overall, we've got a really nicely functioning diary app. Doesn't need a submit button. The user just logs in, enters their text, and then goes away and to come back and add some more the next day. So it's a really great application. There's a lot more that you could do with it if you wanted to allow them to make separate entries for different days, for example, or use rich text formatting or input images or embed videos and that kind of thing, then please do run with this and use it as an opportunity to learn more and make your application more exciting. And as always, please do put a link to anything you create in the forums so that I can take a look. But for now, congratulations on completing the MySQL challenge in this course, and let's go and have a look at APIs for the next chapter.